play it any louder, then it's getting shut down.
My name is Waffles, and I'm a government whistleblower turned political commentator, and this is the last 24 hours in the news. Today is October 15, 2025. It is 9:59 p.m. Mountain Standard Time. Here are the top U.S. news highlights for the past 24 hours. A judge has ruled that FEMA relief was wrongly tied to immigration as the administration breached court order. A federal judge found the administration violated a prior injunction by again conditioning FEMA disaster relief funding on state cooperation with immigration enforcement. The ruling says the government has not acted in good faith and orders the practice stopped. This is an immediate governance risk because it threatens withholding critical disaster aid. Harris County, Texas sues over canceled Solar for All grants. Harris County filed suit this week, alleging the administration unlawfully revoked large clean energy grants for low-income communities, a concrete example of federal program changes that put local services and contractors at risk. Expect litigation to seek injunctions that could restore funds or stall projects. Congressional oversight ramps up. House Republicans request Jack Smith testimony. The House Judiciary Committee has formally requested former special counsel Jack Smith to testify and to produce documents, part of escalating oversight and political legal pressure around past prosecutions. This raises additional legal theater and potential privilege document fights. So this is the Republicans that are requesting Jack Smith. Crime, extremism, and civil risk. Federal judge extends to block National Guard deployments to Portland, Oregon. An Oregon federal judge extended temporary restraining orders that prevent the federal administration from deploying National Guard troops to Portland. The extension follows prior litigation arguing federalization exceeded legal authority. The extension is an immediate limitation on federal use of military guard forces against city residents and protest activity. U.S. military strike off Venezuela kills 6. Domestic, legal, political fallout. The administration carried out a strike on a vessel near Venezuela on October 14th that killed 6 people, which has prompted bipartisan questions about legal authority and use of force standards. While this occurred offshore, the operation has domestic political repercussions and has been referenced in oversight inquiries. Federal tactics versus protesters. Press remain under judicial scrutiny. Courts continue to limit certain federal crowd control tactics and enforcement measures after recent orders and hearings. Litigation remains the primary check on federal enforcement options within U.S. cities. Policy shifts and institutional power. Program cancellations and review rescinds risk immediate service gaps. Beyond the Solar for All suit, Interior and other agencies have moved to cancel or narrow reviews of major renewable projects and programs, creating administrative uncertainty and potential gaps in planned infrastructure and jobs. Local governments and contractors already reporting disruption. FEMA funding conditionally, a direct risk to disaster preparedness. The court finding that FEMA grant language was improperly tied to immigration cooperation leaves states concerned that funding reliability is compromised. A material risk for communities facing hurricanes, wildfires, or floods. Agency staffing and capability erosion, public health, and others. Large personnel actions at the CDC, hundreds of furloughed and fired, then partially reinstated, are reported to have reduced core capacities for outbreak surveillance and response, a systemic institutional risk to citizen well-being. Clean energy grant cancellations threaten local projects and contractors. The Harris County lawsuit and related agency actions mean immediate cash flow and scheduling risks for locally contracted solar installations and energy assistance programs serving low-income households. Expect project delays and possible layoffs if injunctions are not issued. Trade and tariff rhetoric and sanctions raising supply chain and commodity risk. Escalating rhetoric and sanctions, including recent Chinese curbs on some shipping affiliates, are producing volatility in agricultural and commodity markets, soybeans and cooking oil, for example, and raising freight costs, uncertainty that can ripple into consumer prices. FEMA funds on hold for some states. Disaster response delays possible. Reporting shows millions in FEMA funds for certain states remain in limbo or under legal challenge, a tangible risk for immediate disaster mitigation and recovery projects. CDC staffing turmoil may impede outbreak response. Over the last 24 hours, multiple outlets reported mass personnel notices at the CDC tied to broader staffing cuts during the shutdown. While some staffers were reinstated, hundreds remain affected. Public health experts warn detection, contract tracing, and surveillance functions are degraded. This is a near-term public health risk. U.S. strike near Venezuela escalates hemispheric tensions. On October 14th, the strike that killed 6 prompted international criticism and congressional questions about legal authority for cross-border offshore kinetic actions, increasing diplomatic strain on the hemisphere. Diplomatic engagements continue, Gaza, Argentina, etc., with political ties to U.S. policy. The administration's active diplomacy summits on Gaza and high-profile meetings with foreign leaders continues to shape alliances and carries domestic political implications, especially where aid or military cooperation are discussed. New and active litigation, multiple lawsuits filed in the last 24 hours, e.g. the Harris County suit over Solar for All grants, courts finding FEMA conditionally unlawful. These suits challenge program rescissions, grant cancellations, and executive memoranda, and some seek injunctive relief that could restore funding or block policy rollouts. Congressional subpoenas, testimony demands, House Republican actions seeking Jack Smith testimony add political legal pressure and could prompt further document fights and public hearings. The last 24 hours show a pattern of administrative retrenchment, program cancellations, grant revocations, staffing cuts, plus assertive use of force overseas, Caribbean strike, and aggressive oversight political pressure, committee demands. That mix increases near-term legal exposure, operational risk to public programs, FEMA, CDC, clean energy products, and civil-military tension over domestic deployments. Courts remain the primary brake on several of these moves. Expect fast-moving injunctive filings and political escalation. Today's stock market closed with the S&P 500 at 6,671.06, up 0.4%. Nasdaq Composite closed at 22,670.08, up 0.7%. Dow Jones Industrial Average closed at 46,253.31, down 0.1%. For those of you who are visual, this is the stock market close for today. This is the S&P 500. The Dow Jones Industrial Average. And Invesco QQQ. And here are the economic highlights for the past 24 hours. Fed's beige book, economy little changed, employment stable, signs of strain. The latest beige book shows U.S. economic activity has been largely flat across districts, with employment steady overall. However, multiple regions flagged rising layoffs, softening consumer demand, and cost pressures from tariffs and inflation. Federal shutdown may cost $15 billion per week in lost output. Treasury officials estimate that the ongoing federal government shutdown is draining about $15 billion in economic output per week, posing mounting drag on growth. U.S. warns China over rare earth and critical mineral export controls. Senior U.S. officials, including Treasury Secretary Bessent and U.S. Trade Representative Greer, condemned China's new licensing requirements for critical mineral exports as a strategic threat. They warned these controls could prompt global decoupling and threaten tariffs if not rolled back. China escalates shipping conflict via capital markets and port fees. In response to U.S. port fees on Chinese and Chinese-built vessels, China announced retaliatory charges, including sanctions on U.S.-linked shipping affiliates. That would be Hanwha Ocean Units. This extends the maritime dispute into financial and trade infrastructure. Trump targets Chinese cooking oil trade, but effect likely limited. President Trump threatened to terminate some trade relations with China over cooking oil, despite data showing U.S. imports from China have already collapsed, down 65% this year. Analysts view the move as symbolic rather than impactful. Treasury Secretary Bessent said the administration will explore taking ownership stakes in key companies in sectors like rare earths, semiconductors, and defense to reduce reliance on Chinese supply chains. This marks a shift toward more active industrial policy. Ownership stakes in companies. Markets, commodities, and currencies. The S&P 500 gained 0.4% and the Nasdaq rose 0.66%, led by banking. Morgan Stanley and Bank of America and chip AI optimism. The Dow was roughly flat or slightly down. Oil drops to 5-month lows amid supply outlook trade concerns. WTI and Brent dropped on renewed U.S.-China tensions and expectations of supply surplus in 2026. Gold breaks records past $4,000 and $4,200 an ounce. Safe haven demand amid trade risk and interest rate speculation pushed gold to new highs above $4,200 per ounce. Dollar weakens versus yen and euro. The U.S. dollar extended losses against major currencies as market sentiment cooled and trade tensions grew. And remember, kids, the stock market is not the economy. Just because the S&P 500 or Dow Jones might be performing does not mean that wages are growing, jobs are secure, inflation is under control, or that people are thriving. And here is the upcoming hazardous weather outlook for the next few days. Widespread life-threatening storms are not expected, but isolated flash flooding and damaging winds are possible where storms repeat over the same areas. Here's the regional hazard outlook for the next 3 days. Southwest and southern plains, a broad trough of moisture will move through New Mexico, Arizona, and western Texas, bringing rounds of thunderstorms through late Thursday. Risks gusty winds, localized hail, and flash flooding in desert and canyon terrain. Timing Wednesday night through Friday morning. Areas to watch: Tucson, Albuquerque, El Paso, and Lubbock. Central Rockies and High Plains, moist air rising over the Rockies with fuel isolated strong storms and elevated runoff in mountainous areas. Risks brief hail and damaging wind gusts, especially Thursday and Friday. Flood watch potential low to moderate for higher elevations in Colorado and Wyoming. Midwest and Central Plains, weak fronts moving through Kansas, Missouri, and Iowa will generate spotty thunderstorms and locally heavy rain. Risks flash flooding in areas with poor drainage, otherwise low severe threat. Timing mainly Friday into early Saturday. Southeast and mid-Atlantic moisture from the Gulf Atlantic will bring scattered showers and isolated storms, mostly diurnal, that means afternoon. Risks minimal severe potential though localized flooding is possible where storms stall. Areas to monitor: Georgia, the Carolinas, and Virginia foothills. West Coast, a Pacific disturbance will bring periods of rain to coastal California and Oregon. Risks slick roads, isolated lightning, and minor flooding near burn scars or low-lying valleys. Timing late Friday into the weekend. Northern Plains and Great Lakes, mostly quiet with cooler air and occasional light showers. No severe weather expected through the weekend. Key international news. Here is the international news highlights for the past 24 hours. U.S. planning international stabilization force for Gaza. I'd like to see some people looking into this. Let's get some further details. I find this concerning because there's been talks about Trump having realty interests in Gaza and making inappropriate statements about things that he plans to do to Gaza. So we want to see who is profiting from this stabilization force, because I don't think that there's good intentions for this. U.S. advisors report that planning is underway for a multilateral force to help maintain security in Gaza under the Trump-backed 20-point Gaza plan. What the fuck is that? While the U.S. will not send combat troops, it intends to contribute up to 200 personnel in coordination roles and is negotiating participation with countries including Indonesia, U.A.E., Egypt, Qatar, and Azerbaijan. So this is something I think we all need to have under the microscope. Let's not just forget about what's happened, and let's not forget that the United States supplied the bombs that destroyed Gaza in the first place. Trump authorizes CIA covert operations in Venezuela. President Trump confirmed he has authorized covert CIA operations targeting Maduro's regime in Venezuela, increasing the administration's pressure campaign. A $50 million reward has been offered for Maduro's arrest on drug trafficking charges. U.S. nearing trade deal with South Korea. Treasury Secretary Bessent said talks with South Korea are close to completion, with both sides negotiating final terms during the IMF World Bank annual meetings in Washington. China sanctions U.S.-linked Hanwha shipping units. Beijing has banned dealings with U.S.-linked affiliates of South Korea's Hanwha Ocean. Citing security concerns, analysts view this largely as a warning gesture in the broader trade standoff. Russia rejects Trump's claim that its economy is collapsing. Russian officials pushed back strongly against recent U.S. statements that Russia's economy is near collapse. Moscow defended its energy supply and economic stability, citing forecasts of modest growth for 2025. Apple commits to boosting China investment despite tension between the U.S. and China. Apple CEO Tim Cook announced plans to increase investment in China during a meeting with Chinese officials, signaling continued corporate engagement in the Chinese market. Pakistan conducts airstrike in Afghanistan's Kandahar province amid renewed cross-border tensions, escalating conflict between the two neighbors. New violence along Pakistan-Afghanistan border kills civilians. More than a dozen civilians have reportedly died in cross-border attacks by Pakistani forces into Afghanistan, with dozens more injured, per Taliban and local sources. BlackRock and NVIDIA Group, the two working together, signs $40 billion AI data center deal. A consortium backed by BlackRock and NVIDIA struck a deal to build a $40 billion AI-focused driven data centers globally. This pact underscores continued momentum in AI infrastructure investment worldwide. China maintains production first economic strategy amid U.S. rivalry. As U.S.-China competition intensifies, China reaffirmed it's all about production development model, prioritizing high-tech manufacturing, boosting consumption, and mitigating supply-demand imbalances. This is the stupidest part of the United States trying to engage in a sudden economic war with China. We need to have the infrastructure if we're going to be manufacturing. If Donald Trump is going to use all these tariffs to stop things from coming into the country, we do not have the facilities to compete with China. They're much more high-tech and more capable of producing stuff. And so what's going to happen here is China's going to be producing, and they're going to be laughing at America while Trump makes an ass out of us all because we don't have manufacturing facilities. Donald Trump has not made any investments into infrastructure, and the infrastructure should have come way before any attempts to engage in tariff war. We need to have the assets to do manufacturing before trying to oust China on being superior in manufacturing. This is the stupidest trade war I have ever seen in my life. It's really the only one, but it's stupid as hell. Global oil market faces surplus risk. The IEA's revised forecast now projects a deeper oil surplus in 2026, driven by OPEC plus production increases and sluggish demand growth. The report could pressure energy markets globally. This concludes our news report for today. We will see you guys later. Everybody stay safe out there.
So the Olympics is great. And Johnny, for the others, you know, the World Cup, Johnny is the head of it. We had our top people, Wasserman. They all came in, won the Olympics, and then I saw Johnny, and we got the World Cup too. And you know, it's only because they rigged the election that I'll be your president representing you there. You know, I got both of them. I got the Olympics and I got the World Cup. And I said, you know, it's too bad. One was in 2026 and the other was in 2028. And I said, I won't be there. I won't be your president. But then they rigged the election and now we won. So I'm going to be your president for the Olympics and for the World Cup. So, Johnny, thank you for the World Cup. And everybody, thank you for the Olympics. We're going to have a great time.
Hey guys, don't forget to like, share, subscribe, and comment to my videos. And also, don't forget to check out my shop where you could get this awesome Real Patriots Punch Nazis t-shirt. America, fuck yeah! And if you go to the link tree in my bio on most platforms, it's got links to everything, all of my stuff. You can find my shop there. I'm on eBay. You can also get this cool Exterminate MAGA sticker, because MAGA's fucking cockroaches. And fuck MAGA, abolish MAGA, fuck you MAGA.